learned at Mental Health Match and help your community really resonate and connect with some new clients.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have been excited for this conversation for a couple weeks now as leading up to it, and we've thought through this process. I think, you being on the other side of this perspective, we can say with confidence that like listing sites and the directories, whether it's yours or the other spreads that exist in the industry, are kind of like cornerstones for how people find like independently licensed private practice owners, practitioners, and all of those things. And it's such a unique process to this type of industry for how people find a provider, but it's such an important process for the therapist to be represented well and for platforms like yours to work hand in hand to make sure everyone's equipped to facilitate this relationship well. So again, thanks for coming in, and I'm excited to dig into a couple of these things today.
Yeah, me too. And I think the lessons that we're going to talk about work for any profile, but they also work for your website, social media, like anywhere where you have to describe yourself and try to connect with new clients. So I think
Yeah.
these would be really broad lessons that folks are going to take away with.
For sure. So if you're tuning in with us, we are going to be digging in to some of the best, really the six big sort of research-based principles that really create high-performing profiles, like you said, on a site for a directory, but a lot of them are going to transcend this and dig into other processes. And if you are kind of digging in and you're like, hey, I've never met Ryan before, let me give you a little bit more context on who he is. So, Ryan believes that therapists can heal our world, but only if they feel supported, connected, and able to thrive. So he created a modern therapist directory, that's Mental Health Match, to help practices grow with their clients and the work that they love. And so prior to founding Mental Health Match, he was a communication strategist who used words and stories to bring people together and create social change. Ryan also co-founder of the Therapist DAO, a therapist community building the first large-scale clinic completely owned, governed, and designed by therapists. And Ryan and his husband also live in Portland, Oregon. So yeah, thanks again. Let's kind of dive in here as we're talking about the context of listing sites. Maybe set the stage a little bit of these like six principles. Like, how did you guys come about these? You told me they were like research based. Tell me a little bit about like what you guys dig into on the other side of observing directories and inquiry flow, some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, since we launched Mental Health Match in 2018, we've had 2.2 million clients come and view profiles and scroll through the directory, use our matching algorithm. And so we have a lot of experience with clients looking at profiles. And
Yeah.
so what we did is we took the top 200 of our best performing profiles,
Okay.
and we took the top 200 of our worst performing profiles, and we looked at them. We analyzed the language that they use. We analyzed their photos. We looked at, tried to control for variables like fees and insurance if they were in network, their specializations and things like that. That's where we came up with these six lessons.
Yeah.
And then we tried them out. So we helped therapists on our site rewrite their profiles, and we would see if they made any changes. And all of the six lessons that I am going to share with y'all today, we all saw made positive changes, and specifically looking at like the number of clients who look at the profile that go on to contact the therapist. That was the measurement that we used. So, we would see sometimes they would have 5% of clients who looked at the profile would go on to contact them. We would make some changes, and then it would all of a sudden be 40% of the clients. And so that's the kind of data driven analysis that we did, and I feel very confident in what we're sharing as something that can help anybody from their mental health match profile to a psychology today profile to their website.
Yeah, and that's huge, and I love how you measured some of those things in terms of like, well, okay, it's not just we did some observations and we found and maybe vaguely these things, but like you extrapolated, you tried it on some new profiles, and then you measured it again and saw what happened. So maybe kind of like hit us with the first one, and we'll dive in from there.
Yeah. So I think two things are really important before we jump into them. The
Yeah.
first is to say that therapists, you have the skills for this. I know it can be really overwhelming to sit down, especially if you've got like a blank screen and you have to describe yourself. But what makes for a really good profile, it's all about connection. So when I
Yeah.
was a communications consultant, we used to say, good communications aren't creative; they're connective. You don't have to be a fancy writer. The best profiles we have are not fancy writers. They sometimes sound weird. They sometimes have weird grammar choices, but they make a connection. And
Yeah.
it's really all about that connection. And so to think about who you're making a connection with, it's often really helpful to think of specific people, specific clients that you've had and write to them rather than kind of a vague audience. And you have to
Yeah.
remember that clients are seeking therapy when they're overwhelmed, when they feel uncertain, when they feel alone. And all of those feelings are present when they're reading your profile, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I think it's like every day when you are in a therapy room or a therapy space, you are meeting people who feel overwhelmed and uncertain and alone, and you're
Right.
helping them feel reflected, you're helping them feel connected, you're helping them feel a sense of hope. And it's those same skills that you want to bring to your profile. And so it's
Yeah.
funny because, we would see, I think if somebody came to an appointment with you feeling overwhelmed and uncertain, would you rush and start naming off all of the clinical modalities that like you don't do that in a therapy room. Like, would you rush to remind them of all of the negative things that might be happening in their life? Like, you wouldn't do that either. But yet we see
Yeah.
so many profiles that are just like lists of clinical jargon
Right.
or just like lists of really negative things like, is your life out of control? Do you feel
Right.
hopeless? Like, and so it was really interesting to look at that disconnect between like what we know therapists bring, the skill set that they have, and then what happens on a lot of profiles. It's so completely different. So before we
Yeah.
jump into the lessons to learn, I think it's really important just to ground yourself in your therapy skills and your therapy experience. And remember that your profile is doing a lot of the same thing that you would do with a new client when they show up for a first appointment. You're building connection, you're helping them feel safe, you're helping them feel seen.
And being grounded in that is really important because as I've had conversations with people trying to write that first profile or revamp it or do the website, whatever it is, it can feel very abstract because, there's all these people in theory like visiting it and trying to make awareness. So to some degree, it is logical to be like, well, I don't know who's seeing it, so I just need to list out everything that I maybe do so that way at least they know that I do it and maybe they'll contact me and like so it can feel really hard to be like, wait, well how do I bring that level of groundedness and that direct like this is who I am in a more contextual way to sort of this strange process, right? So it's a good
Yeah. Yeah, and we had another communication saying when I was doing that work, which is if you try to speak to everyone, you end up speaking to no one
right.
because you don't actually say something that resonates. And what we learned is like really strong profiles, they feel reflective. Like if somebody looks at those, a therapy seeker looks at those and says like, "Oh, they're talking to me." And when you don't do that, when you just kind of create this laundry list of like, my favorite, I see it all the time. Like, I see clients ages 8 to 88, right? And it's like, well, that's not actually talking to me. I'm within that range, but it doesn't really say anything to me.
Yeah.
And it's even more important because half of all traffic that we get, at least, is on a cell phone.
Okay.
And so you have to remember, like, if you think back to some time when you were on a phone and you were scrolling through something, whether it was, a list of restaurants or Facebook
Right.
posts or dating profiles, whatever it was, we have a certain mentality when we're on a tiny little device and we're scrolling. It's very
Yeah.
reactive,
Yeah.
and so people will look and just if it doesn't catch them, they'll move on. And so it's really important to remember we want to be connective. We want to help people feel reflected. People are scanning and skimming. They're not looking up words they don't know. They're not reading deep into all of the text that you've written.
Yeah.
It really is a quick skim. And so that's
Right.
even more important to speak their language and connect with them.
For sure. Yeah. Great context. Thanks for diving into that.
Yeah. So okay. So you brought up this idea of like kind of listing off everything that you do. And so I'm going to like flip the order. Typically I save this as our last lesson that we saw, but it is, I'll bring it up here first, which is we do think it's really important to have some kind of niche.
Okay.
Okay. So Joshua, do you say niche or niche? Which one are you?
So the hard part is I genuinely say both on on any given day because I'm surrounded by people who say both all the time. So it's one of the few words that I don't have a set standard on, and it just falls out. But I think these days I default into niche more than niche. But
Yeah, I'm going to go with niche then.
there we go.
Um, it's really important to express some kind of specialization in your profile or on your website. Um, I know that can be overwhelming for a lot of folks because they're not ready to commit their career to some specialization,
Right.
but your profile is not your career. You can change how your profile sounds all the time.
Yeah.
You can, but it is important because people need to feel reflected. I will
Yeah.
say, like, we do have users on our site who go and as long as you're take their insurance or you're affordable, they'll go and contact 30 therapists, right?
Right.
And we often see the profiles that are the laundry lists of things will be contacted specifically by this type of user.
The spray
Um,
and pray. Hopefully someone gets
yeah,
that.
and those are not the users who are going to follow up with you. They've contacted 30 therapists. They don't care. They don't care about the relationship. They just need help that minute, and they're hoping for it. I do occasionally have a therapist who says, Ryan, just give me all of those contacts and I'll sort them out later.
Yeah.
If that's how you want to approach it, like go for it.
Right.
Be broad and see if that works for you. But most therapists, we have limited time. We want clients contacting us who are a good fit for us and clients who are going to stay with us and actually develop a relationship with us. And for that, those clients need to feel like your profile reflects them.
Yeah.
And so it's important to talk about a niche. You can have like a list of things, you can say like, I I help, working professionals who feel stuck on the job, and my clients include people with ADHD or autism or learning disabilities. That's a way to do a list like under this umbrella. But it's really important to have some kind of umbrella so that people feel reflected and feel like you're talking to them.
Yeah.
Um, Change it up every few months. Like you might not be ready for that as a career move, but that having that niche just articulated is really important to building that connection with
Yeah.
folks.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's this clinician out there that's like, hey, I love working with couples, and providing awesome, great couples therapy, whatever that looks like. But then I also work with moms with postpartum depression or, whatever it is, right? And those are probably just scattered enough. And maybe there's 4 or 5 more versions of that in there, right? And it's going to be more advantageous if you want clients to come from the profile, if maybe you stick to one audience, one topic, one niche, so to speak, right?
Yeah, and then change your profile, or put your Psychology Today profile about your postpartum moms, and put your Mental Health Match profile about your couples therapy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, if you just talk about postpartum moms, and somebody lands on your profile seeking couples therapy, it's not going to be a match. And if you try to do it all, uh, I've seen it done artfully, but it's really difficult, and it just becomes too thin. And then it's like, well, I'm a postpartum mom, but this person seems like they really just do couples therapy, but I don't know. They kind of threw it in. Do they see me? And this is especially a
Yes.
problem, I think, for newer clinicians, because then people start to doubt your expertise when they see
Right.
that you're newer, and it doesn't feel like you've got a focus. People start to doubt that. I
Yeah.
will say this is a sneak peek that we really haven't shared much about, but we are about to release a feature where you can have different profiles, depending, like you can have your couples therapy profile, your individual therapy profile, and that will show to the right type of client, because having those broad things is a hard thing to navigate. So
Yeah. That
we're gonna fix that with the
is
tech
and
solution.
will be an incredible iteration. That sounds so exciting, and just in some ways makes logical sense on a tool basis for you guys. So that's a really cool offering. Okay, so we
Yeah.
have some clarity. Let's talk to one person. If/when change it out, swap it out? I just have to ask the question
Yeah.
because I know it's in the back of someone's head. You guys don't penalize a therapist for like editing their profile, or like it doesn't affect their like ability to rank, or whatever that is. Tell me, just like put someone at ease on that topic.
I love the theories about how these algorithms work. So
Yeah.
mental health match is very transparent. We match clients and therapists based on how well you are a match for their needs. It has nothing to do with anything else. Can the client afford you? Do you meet their cultural needs? Do you work with their presenting issues? Like the modalities match. Like that is what we're focused on. And there's no magic to it. The best
Yeah.
match therapist gets shown first. There
Right.
are other directory sites that are not transparent about how they rank therapists. And there's a lot of speculation. I love
Yeah.
seeing like people are like, oh, just edit your profile once and all of a sudden you'll be at Psychology Today. What I see in a site like Psychology Today is that it is just rotated through. If you're on the last page, you will work your way up to the first page. And if you're on the first page in the next month, you'll be on the last page. So I don't think it's that fancy. There's no extra benefit for tinkering like that. But I do think it's important to kind of keep changing and trying on different parts of your profile and see what might work better or to bring you the types of clients that you want.
For sure. Well, that probably brings us into some of your other suggestions. What's kind of your next big research-driven principle?
So when we took all these profiles and we did a language analysis, we looked at what words are used in the profiles that perform best and what words are used in the profiles that perform worst. And the first thing that popped out so clearly was that the profiles that perform best all use what we call like words of connection, words like we, together. Um, those were absent in the worst performing profiles. Just those
Yeah.
two words, even simply we and together. And it made so much sense to us when we looked at that because a lot of ways your profile is an invitation to create a relationship, right? Like we really think that the therapeutic relationship really starts when a client finds your profile and starts
Yeah.
reading your profile and developing ideas about who you are. And so the words we and together indicate a relationship. They start that connection. There's an element of like forward thinking about what we can do together. And those became very clear. Like that was our first big lesson is that
Yes.
it's important to, with those words, build a connection with a potential therapy seeker.
Okay. I don't know if I have like too much to add, or to, like go in depth on that one, other than the comment to say that like words, even small words, even one or two, the difference of words like can really matter here. And so like I'm glad you're bringing that to light, and not to like put pressure on a counselor or therapist, but like you guys use words as a profession, and just kind of like highlighting the fact that like there's so much power and life and relationship in the words
Yeah.
you use. And it's really cool how just a tone change can make a big difference for like moving someone through. And I don't know, if you ever see this, of like maybe it's even people moving through that might not have taken action to begin with. So it's not like that they went to a different
Right.
therapist profile even, but it's
Right.
just like, did they convert to being a client in therapy, period? And that's huge.
Right. It's huge, right? And it's like you said, like a small language shift. So we see so often like I help my clients create a plan to move forward. When you really could say like together, we'll create a plan to help you move forward. And
Right.
it's like just that small shift actually invites somebody into this space with you with
Yeah.
just a couple of words.
And what's
So
funny
that
is
was huge.
yeah, we have a done with you program. It's like one of the main things we do. And now I'm like thinking about my own website. I'm like, man, how, like, other than like the name, like, how often does like together and we and like some of those things show up? Because like that's what we're all about. It's that relationship,
Right.
that building, like doing it with and together. And so, like, like you said, it applies not just to the listing site, but any place where you're trying to foster that relationship. So I really love that.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to talk about photos, but before I get there, you brought up something that actually leads me to a second lesson that we've learned, which is you were talking about, therapy seekers who might not even convert at all. They might just not go to therapy.
Right.
Um, and something that we saw was a number of words in profiles that performed really well that we call words of hope. They're
Okay.
really action oriented words like, improve, ease, relieve, achieve, develop, connect. Um, these are words that show optimism, and they create a sense of what is possible when people work with you.
Yeah.
And this goes back to like a communications lesson that I had learned before, which is if you keep people in a doom and gloom mindset, they don't take action, right? Because you know this as therapists that like to really have like rational planning that I'm going to make an appointment and come to this appointment, it takes some like cognitive ability to do that. And if you are just feeling depressed or overwhelmed or grieving and you're not, and it's just overwhelming to you, it's really hard to make that like logical step to go schedule an appointment
Right.
and take a step forward. And so we saw when we looked at these profiles that the top performing profiles, they would talk about some negative things, but they would really focus more on some optimism, things that they make possible for their clients, things their clients have experienced with them. They help them see what is possible by working with you. The profiles that don't do so well, they just leave people in that kind of like morass of negativity, right? Like, is the world crumbling? Do you find it hard to get out of bed? Like all of those types of
Right.
things. Or like I work with clients who, you know, feel awful, have terrible
Issues.
relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, who have issues, right? And so, it can take bravery to contact a therapist. For a lot of people, it can take bravery. It can take a level of like cognitive thinking. Um, and so your profile needs to help them move into a place of optimism, help them show
Yeah.
what's possible. And so that's the second big lesson, I would say. Oh, wait, that's the third big lesson. We have a niche so that people feel reflected, use words like we and together so people feel connected. And then use words of hope so that there's like a sense of optimism and that you can lead them out of the overwhelm to a place where they're actually able to take action and decide to schedule an appointment with you.
Yeah. So we're about halfway through some of these main topics processes. If you're tuning in live, if you're hopping in, like please leave a comment, a question for Ryan. We'll probably leave some time if there are any of those to go through. And even if you're watching the recording, leave a comment on the recording. I or someone will maybe facilitate trying to get answers to these things. So just leave that as we're going out. So as we head into sort of the fourth principle here, what does that one look like, Ryan?
So I think it's really similar to this what we were just talking about, but it's about the word "you."
Okay.
So the word "you" is really interesting. So it's actually quite tricky because we saw this word used frequently in both the best performing and the worst performing profile. So the word "you" was there, but when we looked closer, the difference was about how the word "you" was actually used.
Okay.
So the lower performing profiles use the word "you" in the context of issues, right? Like a number of things that could evoke defensiveness, shame, overwhelm, right? Do you have a drinking problem? Are you angry? Are you losing your relationships, right? Like these words which make put people on the defensive.
Right.
Whereas when we looked at the higher performing profiles, they use words in the context of the positive, of the hope, right? I want to help you, find love and connection again. I want to help you relieve the anxiety that's holding you back. So it
Yeah.
was all much more positive focus. And I think
Right.
the lesson here is that we can further activate people with our language and especially the word "you." And if people are already overwhelmed and we're causing them to feel defensiveness or shame and they're reactive because they're on their phone, they're going to react by closing their phone or moving to to Instagram or something that feels a little bit better. And so
Right.
um I think the next lesson here is to use the word "you," but use it in a way that builds connection, that
Right.
builds validation, that builds hope, and avoid using it in ways that overwhelm and shame.
Yeah. And as we're just kind of stringing some of these together, it's like together we're going to be doing this thing and you will experience as a result blank, blank, and blank, right? Like together.
Mhm.
So I like the nuances here because as we move away from I do this, I do that, I have this qualification, right? Just like hitting heavily on like sort of me, over to like what are we doing, and not just like what are you experiencing, but like where are you headed and what actions can and is even possible, right? In some ways aspirational and relational and connectedness.
Which is a lot of what happens in a first therapy session,
Yeah.
right? And this is what I want to keep coming back to is like, this isn't new, right? Therapists are like, oh, I'm not writers, so I don't know what to do with this. But like, it's not about writing. It's about what you do every day in building connection with people, right? Somebody doesn't walk into your office for the first time and you just start going, let me tell you about my modalities. I do this, I do that, I do this.
Right.
You are helping them articulate their goals, figuring out how to connect with them, giving them a sense of optimism and hope and confidence in you. It's the same thing that for your profile, right?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And um, I think some of these things, they're very simple. And what's great is that it's not like none of the suggestions are suggestions that should make a therapist feel uncomfortable. Like it's like, oh, like that's going to put my best foot forward to allow a client to just have an easier time saying yes to reaching out to me. And that is so in line with just the mission of therapy and the mission of getting them in the office to help them with whatever they're currently experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Um, I think that this is a good time to bring up our fifth lesson, which is the use of clinical jargon, right? So nothing can break a connection faster than if you start using words that people don't know and all of a sudden they're like, I don't belong here, right?
Right.
Because I don't, what does all this mean? So, um, you know, there's the idea that there is the curse of knowledge. Like once you know something, it's really hard to remember what it's like to not know that thing,
Right.
right? So
Right.
you know what all of these modalities are, you know the DSM, but clients don't for the most part, right? And so um, the clinical jargon, it really breaks a connection with
Yeah.
folks. And like I in my nonprofit communications days, there's someone released this little tool that would like go through a Word document and underline with a red squiggly like all the nonprofit jargon. And I
Right.
really want to see that for therapists because
Yeah.
there's a lot of jargon here, and sometimes we don't even know that that's jargon, right? And
So
I
the way
think that
that
there's oh
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, not to cut you off, but the way that we've gotten around that as we've like given recommendations for our therapists is to put it through a like grade level reading checker because all of those
Yeah.
clinical words are like a college typically like a like high school college reading level. So if you get it somewhere to like a fifth to like 10th grade reading level, typically like you have to somehow say the same thing but remove all those words to like hit that threshold. So we don't have the squiggly line for nonprofit jargon or therapist jargon, but I don't know the grade reading level checker. We tell our therapists to put their profile or website through because it really catches them.
Yeah, that is such a great idea. Um, and it's so true. Like I used to have what I call my Aunt Cindy test. So my Aunt Cindy, we were like grew up, worked retail, wasn't in nonprofit world, wasn't in therapy world. And so when I write something for those worlds, I just like text it to her and I'm like, hey Aunt Cindy, like, what do you not understand here? And
Right.
she'll be like, what the hell is rational motive therapy? Right? It's like, okay. And so there are words that you might want to use like EMDR, right? Where some people do know what that is and they're looking for that, but you might want to give context to it. So rather than just say like, I use MDR, you could say like, I use a proven technique that can help, retrain your body's response to traumatic memories. Like
Right.
give it some context so that you are connecting through what you do rather than breaking that connection by using language that people don't understand.
And as you were commenting on, whether it's people on their phone just like scrolling, skimming, if they just see a list of a ton of terms that they don't recognize, that's actually going to increase the speed that they've moved through it. And at least even giving a little bit of an explanation, if they like slow down and read, or they have it will give the 2-second context for them to go deeper instead of get
Right.
pushed out by a list of, no one likes acronyms or lists of things that you read that and you're like, I don't know what that means. So that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Adding context invites somebody in. Using just jargon and words that they don't understand pushes people away, right? And I think too, like, I don't know if this qualifies as jargon, but we often see words that don't have like that people can't imagine, right? I think about jargon as something that like I can't sense, right? Are you using a word that I can't picture? I can't feel it. I can't taste or smell it, right? I don't,
Right.
it just becomes kind of like mushy words that don't mean a lot.
Yeah.
So, I like to look at, we have an example of a profile that does not do so well. And they said something like, you know, I can help you gain confidence, what is it, gain confidence in the ability to navigate strong emotions that naturally arise in life. And I'm like, it says something. I get confidence as a kind of a feeling word, but like navigating strong emotions that naturally arise in life, like I hear it, I don't feel anything when I hear that though,
Yeah.
right? And when I compare it, when I look at profiles that do really well on our site, like one of the best ones says something like, I help people who feel overworked and underappreciated. And I'm like, oh, those are feeling words, right? Like that's me. Hi, like I'm also feel overworked, right? And so it's like um those make a connection with somebody. They make a connection with somebody's feelings. Like people look at that and they're like, oh, like they're
Right.
speaking to me. Where when we use these words like navigating strong emotions, I don't know if that makes such a connection. So I kind of consider that jargon as well. So
Yeah.
I really encourage folks to try to bring in, like, if you're just talking about navigating emotions, bring in those emotions. Like, what are the feelings that this
Right.
therapy seeker might actually be feeling that are going to make that connection happen when you name those feelings?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we have a lot of conversations about in terms of trying to like parse out the language that a client, like a potential therapy client, will understand or have context to, versus even that, like, two therapists last week used the term flooding to describe and like, well, what's flooding? And then the second tier of like regular language was like complex emotions that arise in life. You're like, okay, we're getting a little closer, but not quite there. It's like, well,
Yes.
when are those complex emotions happening? Like, how are they showing up? Well, I feel overworked and underappreciated, and I feel overworked as a mom, as a burnt out healthcare professional, as a whatever. And then like that's where
Right.
we're like, hey, are you a healthcare professional that
Yeah.
feels underappreciated and overworked and a little burnt out? And you're like, whoa. And then, hey, together we're going to fill in the blank, right? With
You
that.
got it.
So,
Yep.
in some ways, I love this, the story and the profile we're writing as we're digging into these tips.
Yeah.
Do we have one left or two left?
We have one left, and it's
Okay,
not about written content, but we
great.
can't talk about profiles or websites without talking about this one,
Yeah,
which is the photo.
yes.
Um, Photos on profiles are important. They take up the most visual space. And when we do user tests with people, especially when they're on their cell phones, they will often react to a photo and decide whether or not they're going to read anything about that profile. It's not
Yeah,
ideal, right? We know that your photo doesn't have anything to do with who you are as a therapist,
right.
but we have to talk about them because it's there. Just like all of the other things I've been saying here, though, is it's not about creativity. It's not about a fancy photo. It's not like, it's none of those things. The photo is the first point to make a connection with somebody. And the number one way that we see that happen is with photos that show clear eye contact.
Okay.
Um, and so, like, that is it. It's not about fanciness. It's not about if you did it at a professional studio, if you did it in your backyard. None of those things. It is about, when somebody just looks at their photo, do their eyes immediately go to your eyes?
Hmm.
That is what the biggest thing that we saw. And so, oftentimes we'll see photos of people who are looking away, or they've got glasses, they've got glare on it. I was going to put on my glasses for this, but then I realized there's a bunch of glare. You can't see my eyes. And so I wanted for people to be able to see my eyes. That's the biggest thing we see.
Yeah.
So when you think about your photo, you should think about how you're making a connection with somebody. Um, and so show your eyes. Make sure they're clear, there's no glare, there's no big bright spots. Just have a photo that allows people to see your eyes,
Yeah.
because that feeds into the feeling of connection.
That makes sense. And I can see, like, depending on how it goes down, that super nice professional headshot, but also sometimes can turn out sort of soulless but polished with like no sort of direct way to like get to the eyes. Like, it might look great, but like not going to get you what you need. And like a nice little, like quick, direct, mostly like cropped, decent selfie, but like with good eye contact might get the job done better by what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And to dig a little deeper, it's a good time to think about who you're trying to reach, right? So, if you're trying to reach teens, you might dress differently in your photo than if you're trying to reach, CEOs, executives. Although I'm a CEO in a t-shirt, so
Yeah.
maybe not all CEOs, but that take that into account. But really, it's just about making eye contact, and sometimes the best way to do that is with a friend in your backyard,
Yeah.
friend and a camera in your backyard.
I love that. So as we've moved through this entire process, right, the central thing that you keep coming back to is one, therapy is overall about relationship and connection, but we actually have to develop that relationship and connection if they're ever going to make it into the chair or on the other side of Zoom, right? And it starts with the photo. It starts by you putting your best foot forward and like just having access to you and your face and your eyes essentially, and then moving that into the powerful but simple language of who are we and what are we going to do together in order to help you fill in the blank with whatever you're working on.
That's right. Yep. The words we and together, and then remember to bring in the word you in the sense of optimism. Like quickly pivot to what you make possible for people, what you can make possible for this person who's reading your profile, and make sure just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Use language that continues that connection and doesn't break it off.
Yeah. Anytime I like read a blog with top 10 whatever or three key steps, whatever it is, someone made a list of something. My mind always goes to, well, what was the fourth one or what was the 11th one that didn't quite like make the draft? Is there like a vague seventh that, is relatively around there or like these it?
That's a great question. There isn't the niche one. I debated whether or not to include. Sometimes I say we have five. So niche was kind of my like sixth one to put in.
Great.
And I will say that because some therapists are like, just give me all the context and let me sort it out. And like,
Right.
that's a choice.
Yeah.
I don't think that ends well for folks. I think it's a lot of unnecessary work that just
Yeah.
creates more burnout.
For sure.
But yeah, I think being able to really speak reflectively to somebody, so that they look at that and say, oh, I feel like this person's talking about me.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of end our time together, and thanks again for coming in and just digging into some of these, principles and processes for just creating high performing content that develops, therapy relationships. You are from, Mental Health Match as you represent them. Maybe give us, especially for some individuals that either aren't on that platform yet or haven't explored, give us the 2-second overview. You've shared a couple logistics for your guys' listing site specifically, and then any next steps if someone like wants to explore your guys' listing site and what that should look like.
Yeah, so Mental Health Match is really focused on bringing you clients who are a good fit for your practice. So we have a screening tool that clients use when they come to our site and ask them questions about what they need out of a therapist, their budget, their insurance, presenting issues, cultural factors, and then we help match them to you and make sure that they're actually a really good fit for your practice. So
Yeah.
folks like to always they say things to me like, Psychology Today, I get this email that's like, hi, I'm Bob, I'm looking for a therapist. But when I get a referral through Mental Health Match, it's like, hi, I'm Bob, I'm grieving, I'm struggling with substance abuse, I'm worried about my relationship, I need to use Aetna, but I'm willing to pay out of pocket $70 a session or whatever it is. So
Right.
it allows you to come into an intake conversation with a lot more knowledge about who this person is, and
Yeah.
actually helps you develop that relationship that's so important. Um, so we are nationwide. Throughout the United States, we get about 50,000 clients who use our site every month. And we would love to bring you clients who are a good fit. Everyone get 60 days free, so you can just try it and see what kind of clients you get from us. Just go to mentalhealthmatch.com and then click on the button that says, are you a therapist? And
Yeah.
come join us.
That's great. And then write a profile using some of this content. I love it. Well, Ryan, thanks for that. Such a pleasure having you today. we'll be looking forward to see, what feedback people have as they maybe dig in and change some language and even some nuances. Changing some I's to we's don't take very long, thankfully. So yeah, thanks again.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to continually talking with your community. You're doing great
Yep.
work.
Till next time.